workshops today, the first of which, the hearing is set for November 12th. Yeah, the three of them should be pretty straightforward. One of them we're going to have to make some additional changes to. The first one is revision of policy 2.21, organization and officers of the board. Mr. Bradshaw's reviewed this one. It's just to insert the language, in election year, the organizational meeting shall be held on the second Tuesday following the general election pursuant to the statute, which is changed, and the other language has been stricken. Glad to answer any questions.
I'll give it a motion. Move to approve policy 2.21 organization.
I don't.
You're just setting the hearing.
Oh, I'm
We're just
sorry.
taking
I always
hearing,
do that.
yes.
I'm
I
sorry.
think you can just wait until the end.
You're not setting a hearing.
This
you're
is just-
a workshop
right,
at the next meeting.
Oh,
that's right.
If you got any major changes, what are you doing today?
Right, if you have any.
We're at the workshop, we're not voting on a thing now,
I
okay?
know it. I do it every time. I'm policy.
Hey, I seconded her doing it, so.
But I do. That makes
Clarify
sense.
that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, for the record, the green looks great on Miss Powers.
I concur. So go ahead.
And the next one is one we're probably going to need to insert some additional language in. This is policy 2.90, tobacco use in district facilities. The Health Department, Florida Department of Health has recommended this language, and Elizabeth Wood with the Department of Health is here, and she can also comment on the proposed change. I guess we've experienced an issue with electronic cigarettes in the district, and we need to add that in. And I would note that in doing some research on this, I contacted EMCS, and they've advised me that none of the other districts have addressed this yet, although it's been discussed, and they're going to research it. And I would propose putting this language in, and then in the meantime, before this comes back for a public hearing, if I run into a problem, I'll let you know. But even the Florida Department of Health, upon looking at their HR manual, they prohibit them. So if the state of Florida can prohibit them, then a political subdivision of the state of Florida should be able to prohibit them. What I would suggest is just insert the language in paragraph 1 where it says all uses of tobacco products in any form, and in parentheses I would put including electronic cigarette devices, which is the same language that the Department of Health uses. And I don't know if Ms. Wood, did you want to say anything?
I have some information that I can share.
It probably would be good.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've created an electronic cigarette fact sheet for you all. And it just kind of goes through like basic common questions to keep it simple because you guys can obviously review it. They are regulated by the FDA as of a 2010 act, but they are not, the FDA has not made any movements or progress with it because they're currently undergoing a bunch of research on the effect of using electronic cigarettes.
It is, and this probably is a question directed at Mr. Bradshaw, does there make any sense to, instead of say tobacco, to say tobacco and or nicotine? Because is this really a tobacco product? Is this more of a nicotine chemical?
You're absolutely right. It is not a tobacco product at this time. It's not labeled a tobacco product. It is, it does contain nicotine. However, the only reason I would suggest not using the word nicotine is because some electronic cigarettes have cartridges. That's what, you use the cartridges. And some of them have, they're labeled 0 milligrams or however they want to label it of nicotine, even though there may be trace amounts in there and evidence shows that there are trace amounts in there, it still is labeled 0 on
Sounds
the
like
cartridge.
Spice, we're dealing with
So
the,
what's the, I mean, I know what the purpose is to help people, wean themselves off cigarettes, but does it give them the same sensation as smoking a cigarette as far as the nicotine part?
It gives them the nicotine high, yes, but since they have not shown the effects of inhaling vapor, because let me see, it goes through the battery, it goes through, you're inhaling not just the vapor, you're inhaling the battery, and you're exposing other people to this vapor. And the FDA is currently doing research on the effects of this. But as of right now, there's just not enough research to show the effects.
if I, and I don't smoke, but if I did, would I use that because I want to continue smoking and I wouldn't be bothering Ginger with this but not to wean me off or to wean me off from smoking?
It is not labeled a cessation device by the FDA. The FDA have asked them if they would like to become regulated as a cessation device, just like nicotine patches or gum or lozenges. But at this time, they have not, electronic cigarette manufacturers have not said that they wanted to do that. Because if they choose to, at any time if they choose to do this, they would have to undergo a double-blind study, just like everybody else did with the patches, with the gum, and with the lozenges. And that usually takes around 10 years.
Isn't this a product that's often used, though, to circumvent being able to go into a restaurant, go on an airplane, and avoid what is perceived as secondhand smoke and exposure to that? And that's really where I've seen it be used. The fact that it doesn't have, at this point, a determination of whether there is harmful effects, my willingness to include it would be probably based on the fact that I don't like the idea that if a teacher or administrator or other type staff member would have this where it would be exposed to students seeing it and there being some type of attraction to the fact or approval that, well, we're okaying this because, Mr. Sam's got it, and so,
That's how it came up.
And that really, to me, would be the reasoning for that more than, I don't like the idea that we are telling any individual what they can do when it's not been determined if they're harming someone else at this time. Secondhand smoke, we have a determination that's been said, secondhand smoke is dangerous. While I'm not saying it isn't dangerous, because it very likely could be, I just don't know that would be enough. To me, it would be the fact that I don't really want students. That also brings up, do we need to put a note in our student code of conduct? Thank you. That this be something that we include in there.
Yes, sir.
I think we probably have covered if we had to address an issue today, but I think it probably wouldn't hurt for us to include it for the future.
If I'm using this thing and I'm sitting next to Ginger, can she smell
It depends. There's lots of different additives and different flavors. And to address what you said, Mr. Kennedy, there's flavors out there like strawberry, coffee, chocolate. So it's like, you see it's aiming not just for adults, because as of right now, and I included this, there is no federal age limit. And in Citrus County, there is no age limit. So unless the manufacturer has their own age limit, a 15-year-old can go and buy one of those blue cigarettes, or blue e-cigarettes, I'm sorry.
And if they bring it to school, then what do we do?
At this time, it's not a tobacco product, so you will not.
Well,
Well, is it
that's
like-
how we need to address it.
What we call simulated drugs, we have simulated drugs in our code of conduct, could it fall under that category?
Facsimile.
Like your oregano, what? Like your oregano for marijuana?
Facsimile.
Yeah. Interesting.
If it becomes an issue, what we may do is like we did with the vacuum cancer, is just do a change to the code of conduct right now.
So for those few, students that are watching us and going, dang, I ain't letting one this afternoon and tomorrow.
Say
Disruption of school function.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Okay.
And
Just wanted to make
Turkey,
sure we could-
Australia,
we could
and
deal with
Canada
it.
have banned it in their country.
Yeah, that's what I
It's like
think.
a start to learn environment.
So if Turkey, Australia, and Canada have banned it, what's wrong with us?
We're America.
Yeah, as of last year, it used to be that electronic cigarettes were only manufactured, only created, every single one was created in China. But since legislation has not caught up to this, if you look on the back, companies like Lorillard, Altria, who is also, Philip Morris, RJ Reynolds, they're all coming out with products. So now you have lobbyists and now you have, people.
Money, follow the money. Got it. Thank you.
So we're okay with adding the language?
Yes.
And you feel we don't need to put anything about nicotine in there?
Well, it's a nicotine delivery system, but
Could be.
just leaving it general and using the same language at the Department of Health until we know more about it. And And we can make it more specific if we need to, but leaving it general allows us to apply to anything that looks like that.
So Chuck, she said chocolate and all that, is that nicotine with chocolate or just chocolate and vapor? Do we know?
It depends on the cartridge.
So there could be a cartridge that had something else other than nicotine.
No, the cartridges are usually like 0 to 4, you can choose your milligrams of nicotine.
Oh.
However, since they're not regulated, the cartridges haven't been regulated through the FDA currently. There have been found traces of nicotine in cartridges labeled 0. So you think you're getting 0, but in fact you're getting nicotine.
Those of us on pretty much any given day can, as we drive out of here, see groups of students that are in the perceived no man's land of the smoker's world. It's in some ways, to me, worse than if we had, in the back of the dumpster. Not that I'm promoting doing the back of the dumpster, but now we've got them right in front of our school, right in front of our district, or right there. Is there anything that we can do to
Run them over.
address
No,
that?
that's right.
And part of it is these are the adult learning. So we're not necessarily entirely dealing, but we also have underage students that do go to the school at the same time. It's a bit of a challenge, and unfortunately it seems to continue to get worse more than it's improving. Mr. Bradshaw, what if anything can we do?
I don't think they're allowed to have tobacco products on school campuses by law, so.
He's talking about when they're out in the right of way.
Well, what they're doing is they're going to the right of way right across from there. Now, I thought that there was a proximity to the school. Is that just alcohol that they're,
It's drugs,
is that drugs?
like within 1,000 feet of a school or something
Right.
like that. I don't believe there's a prohibition as
But
far
you know,
as.
the hospital employees walk across the street and stand in front of IPS and smoke.
Mhm.
And the IPS people walk across the street and walk around the hospital property and smoke. It's stupid.
And they, I'm on the sidewalk, I'm in no man's land.
I chased some guys off IPS last year. The 2 guys were sitting out right in front of the pickup, smoking their brains out. There's some side breakers if you can't smoke. And they left.
Let me look at something, I'll make sense of something creative in my.
Okay. We don't have to deal with this in a policy situation, is what you're saying. We don't, we may have other options.
I think our policy already says that you're not allowed to possess or use tobacco on school district property.
And for those that are wondering or questioning, I believe civil liberties, you should do what you want. I just don't want it exposed, if we can, to those of our underage students that we do not need to be in a situation where we're making it very easy for them to see every day
And that it's okay.
that it's okay. So,
And
what you want to do as an adult,
The
it's your business.
case that came up was a school function.
Mhm.
So
There was a hospital I just read that is not hiring anybody who smokes. You can't get hired at this hospital.
South Florida, I think it was Sarasota.
Was it?
Sheriff's office has a non-smoking policy.
You can't be hired if
Yeah,
you
you
smoke?
could do that. I wish
Really?
I knew that.
And that hospital also charges you more if you smoke on your health insurance.
Oh, I didn't think you could do that either.
All right.
I believe in Seminole County, they just said that the school board, you cannot work for the school board if you smoke. They're looking at that. It has not passed. But in the state of Florida, it is not a protected right, so it is considered legal.
Wow.
It's Penn State, Escambia County.
Legal discrimination.
Mr. Bradshaw.
So hopefully I'm
Yes,
sorry.
could you add to that, 100 feet, within 100 feet of the campus, so that we cover those people on the right of way, not allow them to be there?
I don't think we have the ability to regulate
The right of way?
that's not on our property, but I'm gonna look into.
There may be a different
I
way.
have something to do
Got
out
it.
of my head. And I'll get back to you. These
Okay.
are personal notes right now.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, then moving on to policy 4.11, this is a revision to
Just a minute, Mr. Bradshaw, you wanted to leave?
I thought you said when we were done with.
Okay, very good.
student progression plan. The language is being inserted that states the plan shall include options for academic acceleration and early high school graduation. There are a number of statutes that are also being updated And I think Mr. Clotter's here if you have any questions with regard to this, but
Mr. Clark, is this part of 7059?
Yes, sir.
State statute hasn't changed.
And this has been part of, we've been moving in this, because I know with Ms. Maynard, I was on the subcommittee on this, that when we were developing our strategies to go into the plan.
Yes, sir, you are correct. First of all, good morning, school board members, Superintendent Mrs. Himmel, Assistant Superintendent Mr. Mullen, and School Board Attorney Mr. Bradshaw. I hand out to you today the language that we are looking at for our student progression plan at all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school. And it is consistent, and it basically outlines just what Mr. Dixon had said about the proposal for the policy. I point out that the yellow highlighted indicates how Senate Bill 1076 has actually added to this. So let me just again refresh your memories. We do not have our student progression plans for this coming year. I've shared that with you a couple of times. Don't mean to be redundant, but again, that is part of our plan to bring this to you in the fall, so that way once all the questions are answered in regards to Senate Bill 1076, this will actually appear in all 3 of our student progression plans. But yes, it does identify the process, it does identify the required Excel options. Now, again, don't want to confuse you, because acceleration could have 2 meanings in Citrus County. Max Thompson's version of scaffolding and previewing materials, and acceleration is a different format. This is actually looking at students and accelerating, just like we would do for certain math classes, particularly Algebra 1 honors at the middle school level is one example. So I want to share that with
We've
you
also
today.
talked about acceleration. Even within that, though, has 2 meanings based on subject acceleration and whole grade level acceleration. And we've addressed those a little differently within the pupil progression plan as well, if I recall. We kind of have tried to, the process is was going to be more of an RTI process for the subject-based acceleration, as opposed to a whole grades acceleration really bumps it into another category. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Within that, is there a CLEP system, Mr. Clotter?
Is there a CLEP system? Well, I can say that the similar to that would be our CAP, which would a student would actually cap out of a credit, like the Algebra 1 honors end of course exam.
So they could go into.
They could actually take the end of course exam for algebra and still get the credit for it. Yes, ma'am.
So gonna be a pain here.
That, ma'am, Mrs. Powers, that is bullet number 4 on the very front page, the credit acceleration program. And that's
But if I want to cap out of a Algebra 1 EOC, and I'm in middle school, do I not have that right?
yes, you do.
And when I do that, I've earned the Algebra 1 credit
For high school graduation.
for high school graduation.
But still, middle school promotion needs to be met with a 3rd mathematical class.
And there I think is still an issue. Because if I have shown, if I have a student and they have shown that they have mastered those skills, the idea for promotion of middle school is to say they have mastered the skills necessary for middle school. Clearly, if they met an EOC requirement and they have mastered a high school credit, then why are we still requiring them to pass the course for mathematics if we can then simply have them do another math course, an advanced math course? Or do we? Is that how we, because there's a state statute in there as well.
That's correct. It is
So the state statute is we
statutes.
still have to have the 3 maths.
Yes, sir.
But it does not need to be the middle school maths.
Correct. As a
So,
matter of fact, it's a requirement that we offer high school courses.
so if I'm a 7th grader and I start 7th grade, or I'm a 6th grader and I say, the parent decides, I want them to cap out an EOC Algebra 1 in that 6th grade year, because I believe they can only do it during the EOC window.
Mhm.
So they take it, where are we placing them then next year when they pass?
If they pass the end of course exam for algebra, then we look to geometry for that student to be in at the middle school level for that.
And if I'm taking, I don't need to
As a-
take the Algebra 1 honors to do that. I can simply just request.
Correct.
And how would I do that if I was a parent?
How would you request?
To take the EOC. I determined that, because that's always was part of that RTI, you know, because while they do have a right to take it, does the district, you know, or I should say the superintendent have some, there you go, there's a paper coming.
Another to you. This actually abbreviates the process, but you'll see that there are two ways an acceleration process can take place. And the parent, thank you. The parent, actually, just interesting because I just communicated this with the Department of Education, Helen Lancashire, and she was complimenting the chart that we put in place. But Mr. Kennedy, the formal process is that a parent would actually write a letter to that principal identifying what acceleration process they would like to actually have for their child. So therefore, going back to that bullet for the Excel option that were required, is that they would actually identify the credit acceleration program for the end of course exam for Algebra 1.
Now, here's been the thing in the pupil progression plan that I always struggle with. And I think you do too, and I appreciate, because I've sat with you on some of those, and that is, and I've been blessed to have a student that's gone through this, and we've, you know, it's been part of an evolving process, and I recognize that. So Citrus County, I should note, was doing this before it was made statute. Thank you,
You're
Mr.
right.
Plauder, thank you, Ms. Hemmel, and this board for having a student that now is in Algebra 2 as a high school student freshman because of this district.
Yes.
So here the issue is, they're going to Central Ridge Elementary, and they are a 5th grader, and they're taking 6th grade middle school math. They complete that, and the understanding is that they will then go into, let's say, Algebra 1, or I'm sorry, they would go into pre-algebra. Advanced 6th grade would be probably the next
Typically,
step.
if they're coming from a 6th grade, 5th grade class, they would typically be looked at going into a
Into a 7th grade,
7th grade
right,
math
which
class.
is a typically a type of
MJ2.
pre-algebra type curriculum, if I recall from, they don't identify it as that, but I think it's a similar, is that right, Brady?
Actually,
Yeah, actually, the new course descriptions for 8th grade, we don't have a course 3 or course 3 advanced anymore. They're both called pre-algebra and
They are,
pre-algebra.
okay.
Yeah, that's for their 8th grade. The
That's
7th
grade
grade and 6th grade, excuse me, are really, they're teaching pre-algebra because everything they're doing is leading them and getting them ready for the algebra.
And I will tell you, I think that was a big part of the success of having that course, because there are some examples where we've passed that course up if they were, if they advanced from 6th just into an Algebra 1. But I digress. But here's the answer. So the agreement between Central Ridge and they coming into Citrus Springs Middle School, let's say, is they'll be taking that 7th grade curriculum as a 6th grader. But there's no documentation that now all of a sudden they end up going to, they get relocated or they get moved to, because there's a divorce and they get moved, now they're going to Crystal River Middle. And that principal, they have, maybe this is not the case, I'm using this as an example because we have great administrators that would work together. But it does become, there's no documentation that says now the parent and the student have met all of the expectations that were done or expected of them. There's no documentation to follow that student. Here it says that they will include an option for that. We include the option, but there isn't any documentational plan, such as we have with a PMP process. If you are a remediative student, there is typically an annual plan with accommodations, with strategies, but we don't really have that, if I recall, with the accelerational piece. We've talked about trying to develop some type of documentation, perhaps incorporated into Skyward, but are we there?
Well, wouldn't the transcript serve as that documentation?
what I was gonna, yes, basically their academic history, if you will actually identify them as being in that 6th grade class as a 5th grader. So we have that on their record that they actually are part of that. The other thing is
But the
that,
plan doesn't become part of the cube file.
And I worried about that too when he was talking about the houses.
I don't believe it becomes
What
part of the
you-
CUME has been a question. It doesn't necessarily follow that student's transcript. The transcript will simply just say that they've completed a course,
What
Right.
they did, but not what.
but not necessarily what the direction, the plan that they're going.
if you look, and what we have actually developed is an acceleration document that acts as kind of a plan for that child. In other words, number one, what did the school actually look at in order to review that child's performance to get into that sixth grade accelerated class? So there is, and I don't have that form to show you, I don't have a third paper to hand out to you today, but there is actually that documentation. Now that documentation, which is that performance contract, if you will, would typically be implemented when it is a parent request that started the process, as you can see at the top of
And that's
that.
been my question though, when it's not a parent request.
What is the document that,
We have no documentation to follow that student's plan.
it could be part of the it could be part of the PMP, that's what I basically.
And that's what, I mean, it
encouraging
seems
that-
very logical it would be
putting
part of the
that in.
PMP, but I don't think we have that piece because only if it's a parent request do we have that. And my feeling is just like an IEP or an EP, you would have documentation whether it was parent requested or not.
Well, it shows in his flow chart, the principal identifies, it's either the parent writes a letter to identify the need for this option.
But the documentation doesn't follow.
You're still looking for the documentation that that if it was a principal's decision to accelerate that child, what is that documentation that's in place?
Because we have had examples where one principal had one plan, new principal comes in, new plan, wasn't initiated by the parent. And so now, because the acceleration wasn't necessarily initiated by the parent,
Right.
it was initiated by the principal, so the documentation becomes different.
We are actually developing, this is an Excel, we've had many conversations with principals already. The conversation that I've had with middle schools is that if it is a principal's desire, it's still part of that, it should still be part of that PMP, because not only are we looking for interventions, that progress monitoring plan can also identify the accelerated students. So we basically looked at our PMP that it could actually address both levels at the secondary level, at that middle school level.
But we haven't done it.
Pervasively, no.
Okay.
We have not done
And
that.
and I know that I do think culturally, that has changed tremendously. I think you've been trying to get everyone to do this the same, to be consistent
Right.
about that. And I know, Mr. Clark, please understand, I know that's been a monumental task of getting buy-in, getting administrators aligned with that, and I commend you for it. I feel like we're now at the point that since the state is putting some of these expectations and legal expectations on us, I
Right.
think we need to have some follow through on that
If
documentation.
that is the direction of the board.
But I digress, because this is just one board member.
If that's the direction of the board and you would like us to put that plan in place, because Mr. Hebert at the elementary level, we actually developed, instead of the elementary PMP addressing it, it's very specific. There is another form that actually is an acceleration plan for the elementary, and that can serve as that purpose. We typically wanted to have something in place that we could call that performance contract, which Senate bill actually addresses.
Because in the PMP within the elementary, you have it on Skyward, if I recall, correct? Where you actually tick and tie it based on what the accommodations are going to be, what the
I believe
process.
so. We've kind of transitioned from
And I
approach
think
to
you've been
Skyward,
working
yes.
on getting, at the secondary level, that piece in play. Just elementaries are overachievers, and, and they have Mr. Hebert, who's, got a little whip now that's,
We do have, since 2008, we've had our hard copy of our PMP, and we basically have not done
but only
much-
for remediation, not acceleration.
No, that's what we were talking about.
I thought
We
the
actually
acceleration
have-
piece was only a hard copied piece. Is that, if I'm doing accelerational modifications,
Yes.
that was not part of Skyward's piece?
Oh, I'm sorry, that's Skyward, yes.
It was a hard copy that
Correct.
someone would then have to go to the student's CUME file to obtain. It wouldn't be readily accessible to all the teachers.
That's right.
And that's becomes that to me, that concern is now, unless I go to the office and pull that student's file, I'm not going to have the information as to accommodations, acceleration. And gifted parents, high achieving parents tend to sometimes be a little highly involved in their students' lives. And I think they perceive that that information is then available to all the teachers. And it's not, if I recall.
And let me say,
Have you-
I agree with Mr. Kennedy, because what he's saying is the truth. That I think just the hard copy is not enough, it needs to be within the system. If the remediation isn't within the system, the advancement needs to be within the system.
And we've had conversations about Skyward and implementing that to it. We'll continue to work towards that.
And Mr. Carter, I know it's really a conversation.
I
I know you really have been, but I do think we're there.
Can we just ask before we do move forward? Looking at the first piece, the principal identifies a student eligible. The identification tool used, obviously with a parent, the parent can, just with a parent request, ask for this acceleration program. But is there a unified tool that we recognize so all administrators are on the same page as far as the
Yeah, I will say that there is a consistent acceleration tool that we have in the area of mathematics. Talked before about a placement test at the 5th to 6th grade transition. It basically identifies those 5th grade standards, mastery, showing mastery of that. At the middle school level, the identification of the, again, there's a compilation of a lot of things. Is the Orleans HANA. The Orleans HANA is actually testing a student on their aptitude for algebraic concepts. So that is one. But we do look at a variety of things, and I'll just tell you, FCAT is one. We look at their performance on the placement tests. We look at their GPAs that is actually stipulated in the requirement. They talk about attendance, they talk about record, but academically, those are specifically the ones that we're looking at.
They're all trained to identify utilizing the same tools, basically. So there's consistency with identifying
Yes.
students.
Yes.
Okay, great.
There is consistency in looking at those pieces for an acceleration student.
But Mr. Clark, there's still discretion on the part of the principal. Am I correct that if the principal says they scored out in, let's say, a 4th grade mathematics and they're a 3rd grader and they got an 80% or a 70% and they got a perfect score in the math FCAT, but didn't maybe meet another piece that they do, and the principal goes, this kid's ready. The principal could make that determination to say, yeah, I want to try them in the next grade level. Is that correct?
Yes. That's why that problem-solving team that's actually identified in that flow chart is the teams may include. We have school psychologists that sit on those, the ESC staffing specialists, the previous teachers, their current teachers, and also possibly the teachers from before that. So there's a lot of people that are bringing to that meeting knowledge about that particular student, about the capability of whether that acceleration option is good for that student.
We've got schools that obviously have been modeling this for more time than some of our other schools that I think are coming on board. And we've talked about it can look differently. That's the other thing from school to school. Central Ridge. Because, for example, Central Ridge has a proximity to Citrus Springs Middle. Lecanto Primary has proximity, obviously, to Lecanto Middle. And so we talked about those options can be different.
Well, we're trying to bring some consistency to that.
Okay.
Because the other thing that we've been talking about just this year is how class size amendment comes to bear on this. If you recall, when we started looking at the geometry students for the high school, we had 12 students coming from one school to go to a high school in order to be in that class. Well, that class size amendment then starts to then restrict the high school for the sections that they have. So therefore, again, the consideration is, okay, do you have the staff on your campus to be able to provide that acceleration? And so that's what's really been happening. Like at Central Ridge, there's an example of them going over there for about 9 students. But when we get to that 12, we have elementary schools that are actually looking at offering that accelerated class on their campus.
But statute now has basically said we need to provide some option. But that option, well, I think, and again, I can't help but tout Citrus, we have taken that to be a quite of aggressive, often whole subject-based acceleration. But by statute, it could mean scaffolding, it could mean just providing enrichment to meet that accelerational piece.
I think
we've gone farther, and I really want to make sure that the public and our people realize that's been a better, I think it's better for our students, and I think we're seeing the proof in the pudding, for example, with Citrus Springs Middle School's 8th graders scores this year. There is, I think, a very clear tie to some of those student scores and this commitment. And I really believe that's one of those that have done that. So the statute though, the option to meet statute can be enrichment, can it not?
That's on that first page, that first handout that I gave you. Additionally, schools may offer options that include but are not limited to, and they list specifically those ones. And you just said it, the enrichment programs that we have.
So thank you for your team, Brady, and obviously the superintendent for pushing it beyond simply enrichment. Because I do think, well, enrichment's great. And Mr. Simon will tell, as he tells the things, it is about those high maths and those high sciences, and we're not going to get there for our students without doing that.
Mr. Potter, I want to ask one question, mainly because I had experience with a student one time who was absolutely brilliant, could do any math he could possibly give him, would go to the University of Florida in the summertime. And
The Doogie Housers.
really, exactly. But if you gave him a column of numbers like 123 plus 140, it would take him forever to do that. Yet he could do any kind of calculus problem. And so when you're talking about the courses offered, I'm hoping that basic math is always there, needs always to be included, so the very brilliant still can add a column of figures.
Brady and I have this conversation, I have conversations with others, and
I do too. I'm with you
we
there.
have students that are accelerated, but do we accelerate them at the cost of maybe a skill or a concept that they should have had at a class that they've actually skipped over? And so that's why I think when we get into the conversation today, is that we want to make sure and ensure that they are understanding those, and that's why that process of reviewing them is so encompassing of so many components. But kids that actually will accelerate quickly and miss that grade 8 altogether, there's concepts in there that I've heard high schools say, gosh, I've got this Algebra 2 student who is in this particular grade level. There's concepts that are missing that are foundational skills that they don't have. And so that's really the caution about that acceleration, to make sure that they truly, just like you had mentioned, those basic skills that they would have naturally progressed with, are they missing those, and will they come into bear later on in their academic career?
And part of that, and I'll tell you, because I've got a daughter now who's also going through this, she's a 5th grader going to 6th grade math. But what we had to basically agree as a parent is that she would also be doing 5th grade math work at the same time, for that very reason, so that there wasn't a gap in some of that learning, because here's the other piece. She still has to take the 5th grade FCAT, even if she takes the 6th grade math.
That's correct.
And I will say, I think the data has shown, and again I go back to 8th grade Citrus Springs Middle, that while we had numerous 5s in geometry, as well as 5s in Algebra 1, those students also, in their grade level FCAT, significantly scored out extremely high in those 5s within their grade level. So I do think that you've been showing that. But I do caution one thing, and I'm sure we've all gotten this question. Yeah, your kids may be able to do algebra, but they can't make change. And I'm talking about now those kind of tangible. And my response often is, ask them if they can reconcile, though, a credit card machine and do a spreadsheet. Because while change they may not have as easy a time, it would be almost for them with the limited number of coin currency. It's almost like saying, we also don't know, we don't sort of teach them the same to shoe a horse. We are teaching them skills that are relevant to the world that they are going to have to work in. And as I'm sure some of you know, it costs us 1.8 cents to make a penny. It costs us more to manufacture the penny than to use it. It was determined over a decade ago that we could get rid of the penny and save over $1 billion a year. Yet we still are teaching out of culture the counting of coins, and not that there isn't a value in that. But I would say that I can go to our 7th graders at Citrus Springs Middle, and I believe that's going to be the case with the rest of our middle schools as we put in the iPads, they can do spreadsheets. They can do calculations, and our high schoolers can tell you as they go even into a McDonald's, which requires them to operate a credit card machine, reconciliation, and also have to do multiple inputting on a computer, that if they put a 70-year-old there, they can count the change, but they can't operate the machine that actually they need to do their job. So I just caution, it's important that it's about the relevance of the world they're entering.
Well, it's more than that, though, I think, and maybe Mr. Brady can help me out with this. I'm minored in math, and I took as much calculus and integrated equations as I could stand until I couldn't understand it anymore. And math at that level, and even in algebra and even in spreadsheets, is patterns, and so some of it's pretty abstract. But a lot of it's patterns and recognition of this is how it goes, and you follow this pattern, you apply the solution to your examples, and you learn how it works. Making change and adding and multiplying is memorization. You're memorizing a chart of numbers. And one of our teachers used to say, you know, every math book starts out with number sets in the beginning. She said, even algebra 2 books have number sets in the beginning. And teachers don't spend any time on number sets. That's everyday math was all about number sets. And as a math student, every question I ever got wrong in calculus is because I had a minus instead of a plus, or I made a mathematical, simple computational error. We didn't have calculation. And to this day, I struggle with adding and subtracting and multiplying. I struggle with it. But I can do spreadsheets upside down and backwards. So I don't know that our schools are creating gaps, and by accelerating students, they're missing some of that basic foundation. I think it's a different part of your brain you're accessing, and I think it's different skills. And if you're just not good at doing those simple memorization things, it doesn't matter. That you shouldn't go back and have to conquer, you know, a mathematical chart before you're allowed to go to calculus. So I just think we have to be careful too. When we accelerate kids, we know we're going to jump over certain concepts, but some kids get it so quickly, they just go, yeah, I got it, okay, and they go on. They can use it, they can apply it. So, you know, I think that's part of what's forcing this acceleration is people have been trying to hold kids back.
That's right.
No, you've got to get the basics first. And the basics sometimes become elusive, so,
Okay.
for whatever it's worth.
I agree. Thank you, Mr. Clotter.
I just want to take 1 second to address Mr. Hebert and any of the people who've taught elementary, have been principals and administrators in elementary. When I was a guidance counselor in middle school, I appreciated y'all so much. I used to love to get the folders that you sent over with the material on each student, because I could go through every single student that was incoming 6th grader, and I knew that student before he ever came into the school.
We're talking the green folders.
I loved him. As some people did, but I loved him. I thought you did such a fantastic job that it introduced me to the student before he ever walked through the door, so thank you.
Just so you know, that's still a practice.
Good.
And middle to high as well, we can incorporate.
Yes.
The final policy revision is a minor change. It's policy 7.70 regarding purchasing and bidding. And on page 6 of 8, the Florida Administrative Code citation is changed on item M. And at the end, the new statute is added, 119.071, and the Florida State Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services has changed to Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Those are the only changes of note with that policy revision.
Okay.
I'll bring these back to you after we set the public hearing.
Great. Thank you very much. Goodbye, Mr. Bradshaw.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Mr. Bradshaw.
See you in an hour and a half.
Okay.
Why are you cleaning that?
Expulsions.
Wow. Boy, we really, not the way we do today, aren't
And then y'all will be here for dinner.
Budget update.
Nothing really to bring to you today, other than the fact that 2 weeks from today, we will be passing the final budget. So next Thursday, you should have all your budget material in your box, ready for your review. And if you need to make any time to sit down with me and go through anything, I'm certainly available. The AFR will be there, and the budget book, I think that's about September 5th, that's next Thursday, so it'll be available to review.
Now, when did,
Yeah, sure, we
Did
can.
it?
Yeah. So 3 emails and 2 hard copies.
when is that budget? Tell me again.
September, which, the hearing?
Mm-hmm.
September 10th, 2 weeks from today at 5:30.
5:30,
we?
okay.
Yeah, I'd like to have a hard copy for the meeting, but.
Yeah, I'll put it in your box so that we can email you that.
She wants both.
Well,
Actually, yes, we do all of both. Well, you might not want that.
Yeah, I make my notes on the digital.
I keep doing is scratch the screen. I'm joking.
I was gonna say, I'll get you a cell phone.
Yep. All right, very good, that's it, Ms. Brown.
Thank you very much. All right, State of the District Part 1.
Good afternoon, good morning. Members, again, I'm going to hand out to you a hard copy of the PowerPoint presentation that you're going to be seeing. Okay.
I'll take this. Thank you, Mr. Florida.
Thanks, sir.
You accommodate all learners.
That's true. That's true.
Apologize for just giving this to you today, but again, it's been a kind of a moving target as far as what things to actually cover. And we talked yesterday about providing you with information. And so I'm going to introduce Mr. Simon, no person that is not unfamiliar to you. But one of the things he's actually going to be covering is the slides at the very back. That's why they actually were pulled out. They were put in a very large form. So it's twofold. Mr. Simon's actually going to go over the data, then we're going to talk about some of the responses and some of the things up for next steps. Okay, Mr. Simon.
Good morning. So before we begin, I thought I'd remind us that this really is a classroom and that we really are learning. So we've been fortunate in Citrus County to have Max Thompson, who has helped us through FCAT 2.0, Next Generation Sunshine Standards, and Common Core. He talks about high yield. What can you present? What strategy do you use that gives you the greatest return? Mr. Blocker reminds us all the time about returning on an investment. So I thought we'd start with 2 high yield strategies as we look at the state of the district. And I do want to thank Mrs. Himmel. The state of the district, as you heard referenced earlier, and to the board, and the board have passed, I believe, Ms. Deutschman, Ms. Powers, Ms. Bryant. State of the district is not a practice that is held in the 68 counties now in the state of Florida. It is pretty unique to Citrus County. So I thank you for that opportunity. So let's start first with an essential question. Max Thompson says, the question, although presented may be rhetoric, the conversation should be centered on that question. And as you leave, that question should have answers. So here's the essential question. How can today's information continue to support you as board members and leaders in Citrus County Schools in improving teaching and learning? And again, how can this information help you in your role as a board member and help the leaders in our district improve teaching and learning? Essential question is one of his high yields. Max also, and again, by the way, Mr. Clotter will talk about these, because right now what we're doing is we're presenting the what, the data. The data is the what. Then when we talk about a process we use in Citrus County, so what is a causal analysis, and we've spent a lot of time with our teachers and leaders in the district, particularly this past summer, analyzing what caused this to happen, good or bad. The most critical piece is the now what. And that's what Mr. Clotter will present to you afterwards. So what's happening as a result of this data and information? In the high yield strategies, Max talks about a model. Sometimes they're graphic organizers, so I'm offering to you a model today that will keep us focused, that will give you a clearer perspective and purpose. So the model is, it's Citrus County Schools, exemplified by the four structures. And Citrus County Schools are part of the state of Florida. So when you look at the data today, you're going to look at Citrus County Schools over time, this is called trend data, compared to the state of Florida. Again, perspective and purpose. When you look at this though, you have to remember data is lagging. It's done. It is done. It is over. But we're talking about it and presenting it to you after it's done. Again, starting in 2006-07 school year, ending this past spring of 2013, we're going to compare what Citrus County looks like to the state of Florida. And that's really going to be interesting to see. You know, how is that? What does that look like? And you're going to find, Mrs. Joyce, when you talked about mathematics and patterns and trends, and you're going to see that's going to be pretty clear in this model that we offer and the data that we offer. But the problem is sometimes when we aggregate, we put it all together to a number, all we see is a number and forget what's behind that number. So this model that I'm going to leave out is supposed to remind us what's behind the number. First of all, there are 22 schools that contribute to the learning in Citrus County. In those 22 schools, you need to know, for example, in third grade, there are 9,280 students behind the most current year of 65% proficiency. We forget about that. We look at that number and forget there are 9,280 students and that there are over 55 teachers that contribute to that score. We sometimes forget that there's one school and that those scores are connected to students. So inside one of these houses, and it reminds me as well, because I remember as a principal, and I think back and I look, Ms. Worthaler, Mr. Hebert, who were elementary principals, Ms. Allegretta, you would look at the overall data, up or down, but then immediately you went to the name of the student. So I offer to remind us that while this data is aggregated, while it's clustered, we're going to look at how we compare to the state. It really is about, inside the school, there's a teacher, and I'm going to call this teacher Leanna, because there is a teacher, Leanna, in one of the schools, and there is a student, Zavery. And there is a student, Zavery. And sometimes Leanna and Zavery get lost in the numbers, they get lost in the distractions, they get lost in those sheets that Mr. Clotter printed out that we have in the PowerPoint of all of the distractions, the accountability, the grade, the levels, the changes that take place since actually 1998. So when I leave out this model, Citrus County compared to the state of Florida, we have to remember there is a teacher, there are teachers, there is a student, there are many students that lead to this data, and it's about what we are doing to support that teacher and these students. And in the state of Florida, by the way, on that third grade, there are 1,647,872 students in third grade. There are 1 million, students in the state of Florida that are tested. In third grade, there are 205,478 students. Okay?
There's 2.5 million, 2.something million.
Students, but we have to look at those who are tested. Again, see how numbers can confuse us. The first two slides, these are the distractions possibly, but I think it's important that you're aware of them because they do influence the data. They influenced Leanne and they influenced Xavier, directly and indirectly. This slide shows you since 2007 what has taken place in the state of Florida that has changed assessments, accountability, and school grades. What's critical in 2007, of course, was there in 2006. If you remember, there was an enormous leap across the state in achievement in reading in third grade. So much so it was the state average to the 90th percentile. Good, bad, good and bad. The bad was, of course, so what happens the next year? In this statistical anomaly, the learning gains now no way to go up because of this anomaly or erratic test design, possibly. So that was changed. Learning gains were added. Lowest quartile added. Science, not on the slide there, but science was added for the first time. And every year, almost since then, there'll be changes. So in this PowerPoint presentation, you're going to see these little markers, diamond-shaped colors that by size and intensity of color will reflect the changes that have occurred. 2007, 2010, when high school grade and accountability components were added. 2011, when writing was changed. 2012, the enormous change. 2012 was when we changed from FCAT 2.0 to FCAT, from FCAT to FCAT 2.0, and all the levels changed. The whole definition of learning gain changed, and all the scales related to learning gain changed, along with all of the other changes that are listed below there. And then in 2013, this past year changes, and this chart can go on for the proposed changes for 14, although they may not be of length, that intensity may become a bolder fuchsia color. So when we look in the next slide at third grade, I'm going to take a few moments to explain the framework and design of the PowerPoint. I want you to know that in third grade, there were 1,115 students. Last year, they gave a score. Again, I told you there were about 55 teachers, 11 schools, one ESC Center school that contributed. And remember, this is a test that determines whether or not you're promoted to fourth grade. There is statute, there are rules. Mr. Kennedy referenced earlier some of the options because it is not just a test score. There could be good cause, there could be alternatives, including a portfolio that determines promotion at this level. You're also going to see what the state looked like. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute, but I always want to remind you in front of me, and I'm going to move this. Our conversation can digress, and not that I want to preclude questions, but I really want the conversation to focus on what the data says and lead to what Mr. Clotter will share with you about what are we doing to support the students and teachers in Citrus County. So let's take a moment to look at this design to help, before I go into the data, the axes. If you look at the one axis where 50 to 90, that really is the 0 to 100% of students who would be identified as scoring level 3 or higher or proficient on this FCAT or end of course assessment. The axis that is horizontal will show progression from the 2006-07 school year, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 school year. In orange, Citrus County is labeled. In blue, all the students in the state of Florida. The first pink marker in 2007 will reflect that first column on the second slide that refers to the changes that occurred in 2007. You notice 2008, 9, and until we get to 2010, there really weren't many changes. Notice the stability of the data. In 2010 is when the high school grade kicked in, may not have great influence on third grade components. In 2011 is an interesting flip year, for that is the FCAT test was administered, but the standards and levels for 2.0 were applied. I want to say that again so it's clear. In 2011, those students took the old FCAT state standards test. However, the state went back. The word is retrofitted all those scores and made them look like what would happen if those students took FCAT 2.0 next generation state standards and applied those new levels. 2012, you'll notice is the largest marker and the most significant changes, and then they continued not a whole lot dramatically different in 2013.
So what exactly is the difference, especially at the third grade reading level, between FCAT and FCAT 2.0?
The standards changed. Some of the standards changed. The content of those standards changed in terms of complexities of thinking, requirements for thinking and performance that are measured, and if I could probably simplify it as best I could. So now we're going from a multiple choice A, B, C, or D to an A, B, or C, or D that is an extended cluster of sentences linking to a passage that the students read. So there's greater thinking required in discriminating. So it's no longer what is the author's purpose, where a student in FCAT could just go in and look in the paragraph, and I'm looking at Mrs. Belfour because I recall her teaching this. You can go in the earlier formats of the test and see right where the purpose of the author was stated clearly, word for word, line for line. To answer your question, Ms. Deutschman, in the 2.0 next generation, there is no specific author's purpose. It is implied, inferred, and the student would have to go back, review, or carefully comprehend the first, second, third, fourth paragraph of the passage and determine not only the inferred answer, but B and C may both be correct answers. Which one is more correct?
That is absolutely it in a nutshell. Which one is more correct?
And so that's the distinctive difference. And go ahead,
How do
please.
they retrofit an exam based on one criteria or standards and apply it to another set that hasn't been implemented yet? Because those haven't been implemented in 2011. I think we're going backwards now.
They take a score. They go backwards. So for example, let's say in 2011 in third grade, if I recall this correctly, 82% of the students were proficient. However, if you apply the new levels that took, and it's levels, not content of the test, then it would be 66% of the students proficient.
So that's the year that we had two columns for this.
Correct.
One when compared this way, and the other one started the marker over again going down.
Absolutely. It's a transition. And I expect or think that possibly this discussion, the reference at the summit, is going to talk about what are things that we are putting in place to support transition. And again, I know you mentioned one of those, Mrs. Himmel said, the states that suspend it all and just focus on the teaching, the professional development, the measuring of learning to adjust. There are other things that states do, that Florida does, that did these calculation adjustments.
I think in particular 11, 12, and 13, you really could call those little squares raising the bar. That's what they keep
Correct.
referring to as. And raising the bar in this case had the same impact on every student in Florida, not just Citrus County. And so, for me as a board member, I question whether there's anything that we can do to outrun the impact raising the bar by some external source, which is creating these questions, creating the complexity for every student and every teacher, and then blaming it back on the classroom.
Right,
It's
again,
a very ugly story I'm looking at right now.
right, and I can see how you see that. Let's go back to the model in front of you. And let me first go to the data. So when you're looking at the screen in front of you, it is so very clear to see this pattern. There's this steady, and if I went back to 98, when we were at third grade in the 58% 3 and above, and now notice by 2010 it's 81%. So there's upward trend. Then as Mrs. Deutschman, you just said, now let's raise that bar, and boom, it all drops. So does that mean we stop the support for the Leanna and Xavier in our role, or do we continue to provide, because they didn't choose, Leanna and Xavier did not choose this new bar, new level, new scale, new learning gains. However, they're responsible to react, respond, and take those tests. So that's why I say there is a dialogue and discussion that may take place, and maybe not today, about those external factors. But right now, the reality is that Leanna and Xavier are taking FCAT 2.0 tests that have a higher bar, higher expectation, higher standard, higher levels, more accountability. And again, going back to that essential question in the model, what are we doing to support them?
And while we're talking about externals, I can't help but notice that in 2006 and 2007, we had a lot of money. And by 2011, we didn't.
Right, so again,
That's a great reminder.
overused analogy of perfect storm, it really was a combination of, it is a national, international, statewide economic impact combined with a raising the bar, combined with a more accountability to the teacher, to the student. So all of those together.
And Mr. Simon, 2010, we went from Sunshine State Standards to Next Generation Sunshine State Standards. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's really the difference between the FCAT and the FCAT. The FCAT and the FCAT 2.0 is the assessment to the standards, Sunshine Standards to Next Generation Sunshine State Standards. Was that part of that?
The name of the
complexity?
test, correct. That is the name
It's
of
the
the
name of
test,
the test.
correct.
Just as Common Cores from the Next Generation Sunshine State Standards is going to be the standard. The question, of course, now is it was going to be the PARC from the FCAT 2.0 to the PARC, or now to whatever they determine. So here's the other piece, though, and this goes, I think, to try and complement or follow with Ms. Deutschman. I've never heard a teacher say, I want to lower standards. I've never seen a student or a parent say, I want to learn to a lower standard. I've never heard Ms. Deutschman say, I want to learn to a lower standard. But what we have said is that we are changing the fact that in this, we have made it punitive for the teacher, for the student, and subsequently, I believe, for our communities in the results of what ultimately will come down the road. And the difference is, how do we, and this is where I would agree, the challenge now becomes that the legislators in 2010, when they did it, we still did not have a punitive effect that they have now given us. And by 2014, which isn't there, we are to have implemented an entire punitive system on our instructional teachers to, they know if we dropped 20 points, roughly, from what we were in 2010, or 15, I apologize, 15 points, and it looks like the state pretty much did about the same thing from 2010 to 2011. I would suspect that we're going to probably drop another 15 or so points. And we're going to define that punitiveness would bring the entire public school system to its knees, which is, I believe, exactly the case. That is by design. It is not to improve our students. It is not to empower our teachers to say, as always is the case, our society now requires newer standards. I've never heard a teacher ever say, I want to teach to a lower standard. They, in fact, are often the ones saying, I want to broaden, deepen, widen that thinking of that student. But what we have done is pinpointed a measurement system to penalize that teacher and make it even harder for them. And I just don't know realistically what we're going to do to correct that.
Here's the other thing too that this data clearly shows. When you raise the bar, it doesn't result in increased student performance.
Hello.
We're
Not
gonna see
immediately.
that Not even over 3 years' time. We're gonna see that repeatedly. And you can see even on our data, our trailing data from 2007 to 2010. We internally raised the bar. We brought in Max House. We did all these trainings. We put in place all these things. We've changed how we talk to kids. We have essential questions. We have the what is it on the board where they, the quadrants or whatever. Every classroom you go into today is very different than it was even in 2007. And yet, our achievement level was pretty steady.
So and again, I believe strongly that what you say and the inferences that you make, Mr. Kennedy, Mrs. Deutschman, about it's about the accountability measurement has tremendous merit and tremendous attention needed. That was not what, while I think it bleeds into our discussion today, it was not. And because I'm going to point out to you the following. So looking at 2013, that's 65%, that means the following. Third grade students in Citrus County, 725 met the proficiency benchmark. 390 did not. Now we know, so where Mr. Heber and I had a conversation, we know, again with Mrs. Pompicelli's involvement, that those 390, some of them may have been retained, some of them may have been promoted on good cause portfolios, some of them may have gone to summer school. And you're going to see later on in the data what essentially happened to these third grade students overall in terms of promotion. We'll show you that.
And Mr.
But
Simon, for those that are not, that can't see this chart, that are watching, the state, though, trails, we're doing that by what's running about 66 to 65%. The state has been at 56.
So let me translate those to the figures in front of you. So that would mean, in the state of Florida, 117,411 students passed, 88,573 students in third grade across the state did not. Can you see how that causes us to think differently when we change that percent? We talked about this morning calculations in number sense. Can you see how different that is? So picture a space with 88,000 plus students. You have no place in Citrus County that would hold that.
No, they won't even fit in the largest football
So
stadium.
I say to us that every issue you bring up that are part of legislation, rules, accountability, that seem to not make sense, that are very distracting. For now, I think it's important to have the reference to those, but the conversation needs to be, okay, and I don't wish to defer this to Mr. Clotter, but it's, what are we doing? What are we doing? Because no matter what, there's instruction that's going on in the classrooms right now while we're talking about this. It's going to happen tomorrow and the next day. What is that? What is happening? Because and again, this is what Mrs. Deutschman points out, because there is this trend and pattern, and it is disturbing. So look at third grade. And I'm going to move into almost like...
Mr. Simon, one question, and I don't know if you or Mr. Clotter has this off of your head, but in third grade, do we have a rough idea of how many of our students we end up passing through an alternative means?
You'll see.
You have a slide. Okay,
Yeah, you'll see that.
Never mind.
In a bit. You'll see that in a bit, because and I'll try to extrapolate that out. But let me just move through third, fourth, fifth grade so you can see something interesting. Third, fourth, fifth. I'm going to go back. It's pretty evident. I mean, and again, it supports that that there was as we start with third grade, there's highest achievement, and then you're going to see what's going to happen, particularly when we go to 10th grade. And there's some powerful slides later on that shows what happened If I go from if I was the child that went from 3rd to 10th grade, what would my data and my cohort group look like? You're going to see that in a minute, but notice that almost perfect parallel. And again, the point to be made, if you were to make conclusions, Citrus County in the reading area, particularly elementary, has sustained this significantly high above state performance pattern. It's going to change when we get into other grade levels, but at the elementary.
So what's the one thing that changed for every student in Florida? We have different teaching methodologies, different training, we have a different school calendar, we have everything different, and yet we mimic and mirror the state exactly. The only thing that changed and influenced every single student in Florida is the test.
But we mirror, I think the qualifier too is we mirror above what the state average is.
We follow the same trend.
Correct,
It's
absolutely.
the same impact, the same impact.
Right, you're going to see that.
It's frightening when
Yeah,
you look at this, really.
exactly.
You realize how much manipulation is going on, that the impact is so much the same for everybody. You can't discount it as the major influence.
Right, and I am not doing that right now. I am not discounting. And again, I am not discounting, but I'm trying to focus on the actions that we must do as educational services team. We have actions. So let's look at 6th grade, and it's an interesting difference here. So again, I'm going 5th to 6th. Notice that they started a lower level of proficiency in 2007. They went up. The drop wasn't as steep. Let's talk about, remember the game our son loved, Chutes and Ladders. That chute slide wasn't as long. And then the movement back up is back to the 2007 performance. And again, Mrs. Deutschman, you are absolutely right. This is an exact parallel of the thousands, 100,000 plus students in the state of Florida, 200,000 plus students at this grade level in the state of Florida. So look at 7th grade, and you notice in 2007 we were matched the state performance, and then moved ahead, followed down that chute, and progressing forward. But you did point out, Mrs. Deutschman, another distinguishing element of this shift to FCAT, state next generation state standards. We are not progressing upward. If you notice, it's more of a flat line since 2011 to 13 at certain grade levels. Go back a few, little up, a down in 5th.
Can we make some conclusions about saturation points too? I've talked about this for years. At some
Okay.
point, a 3rd grader is going to learn as much as a 3rd grader can learn. As much as you test them on 4th grade skills, they're still a 3rd grader. So you're going to reach a saturation point where that 3rd grader, until they mature and get older, are not going to be able to be tested at the 4th grade level. What we're seeing, in a lot, especially in 3rd grade reading, is that a lot of that is 4th grade reading skills. There's going to be a point where that child's brain is saturated. They're doing the best and performing at the highest level that they can for their age and for their maturation and for their intelligence, their innate intelligence, and you're not going to get any more out of them. And I think what we're starting to see here is that when you push up the level so high that you begin to see a higher rate of failure, you're also at that point reaching the top of the mountain, and you're not going to go any further. And there's nowhere to go. The kids are already at their highest peak level.
Maxed out.
You can see that. And then, so you ask them more complex questions, more difficult questions, they don't have the ability to answer them because they're already at the top of their peak. I mean, that may be a little pessimistic about the growth capacity, but at some point, you're going to get that capacity down to a very narrow spot.
And you remember, almost like that normal distribution curve of Ms. Powers, the closer you get to that 100, the tiniest step has enormous significance and meaning, and it's much harder to go from 98.2 to 98.3 than it is from 80 to 85. It's much harder. So your point well taken, Mr. Deutschman, as we move and elevate that bar, it gets much more difficult. And what you would define as saturation point or other.
Mr. Simon, you said though too, in third grade reading, and you don't have to go back to the slide, but approximately 8,800 third graders did not pass. Is that right?
In the state of
In the state of
Florida?
Florida.
In the state of Florida.
88,000?
88,000.
88,000 and change.
573.
The trouble I have with that, and I'm going back to also a little bit back to your EQ, is that it is hard for me to entirely accept that it is 88,000 students that failed when I don't have a lot of confidence in a single test on a single day representing that it truly measured what those 88,000 students understand and know. I know for years our teachers use complex multitude of tests, and that's been used since the beginning of teaching, really, to assess. And if that assessment didn't provide the information they needed, a different assessment would be used, and a different type of determination. And that was to understand what that student knew. And that was then compared to that student, not to the student in another state, or in another country, or in the next desk for that matter. So I have trouble when we use the data, from my perspective, of taking this one test, which I am not entirely convinced, and any given year, has been valid in knowing what has been met. Mr. John Mullen said something a number of years ago that I thought was very profound, when the comment often comes and says that our teachers teach to the test. And Mr. John Mullen made the comment, if we are teaching them the standards that we need for them to know and learn, and we are assessing them on those standards, then teaching to the test is teaching them the appropriate information. But we don't have a test that has been consistent from, and I'm going to throw a term from before, from Blueprint 2000, where FCAT began, to Common Core. The test has never been the same. From year to year, we have had a change. So the validity of that information, as we look through these trends, are completely skewed. And that's where I think Ms. Deutschman's saying, when you look at these trends, it is hard for me to say, I'm going to put my money here. And Mr. Blocker, this is where we see the value is we're going to put that money in, because we've had no validity in that test. We know, even as we've had to remeasure our CBATs over the years to construct a test that best measured how we could continue to have excellent instruction in the classroom, we've had to change that.
So why don't we rise up and say enough?
I think the bottom line is we all agree there's a frustration when the bar keeps moving, and it fractures the credibility of all of us within the public education system. Back to your central point for bringing us the presentation that you have today. What are we going to do to support the students and the teachers and staff here in Citrus County? And looking at what we have to deal with, a moving bar, and looking at the limitations of our roles here as school board members. Walk us through the steps that you would like to see us support as far as your initiatives to help bring about the transitions that we can control here in Citrus County to help those kids in those classrooms.
And I think that's what.
And the teachers.
That's what
And the
Mr.
teachers,
Clotter,
support staff, and
Mark will come up, Mark Clotter, and if you look in the audience, all those members who are outreaching to schools for the training, language arts, reading, math, science, social studies team who are present in the room, along with Ms. Wolftaylor on the professional development. That's what you have to hear, and I think you are correct, Mr. Kenny. I'm presenting you a conundrum. I'm presenting you data that's supposed to show information about learning, and while I told you, put on filters so you don't see those external influences, you can't help but see those. So for that, I apologize. I have no other way to show it. I think in the format that you see, it becomes vivid. And I think, Mrs. Joyce, when you reference that, when you share it with other people, other districts, this becomes very clear. But I want to go back because I think we could have an extended conference, communication and dialogue and debate, because there are external parts that are wrong. But I can say I can't, as the Director of Research and Accountability, change those right now because I'm worried about Xavier. Xavier got a 5, by the way. But I'm still worried about Xavier, what's going to happen to him as he moves from 3rd grade to 12th grade, what will occur. So we need to put, and again, you're right, Mr. Block is going to tell you, there are limited resources. You are absolutely correct to say it is risk, reward, punishment. Because in 1 year, in 1 year from now, yes, the punishment is going to extend to those students who don't pass the end of course exam, and an extraction of funding based on that, according to my correct? Okay, that is forthcoming. So all those factors are in place. So again, I'm just asking you to bear with me to look at this data. Please, I mean, I do not want to discourage you from saying what you're thinking or expressing what you're feeling. I really do not want to do that because I think that's important. I also want to make sure that I present this so that if there are questions on what these data points mean, you understand, and then transition it to, so what are we doing?
But Mr. Simon, one of the things that we, and I think this is where I'm just very strong in a part of our responsibilities as board members, is we are in the unique position of needing to make sure that state legislators, state senators, the governor's office understands that our teachers are having to now be penalized on a flawed testing system. That our students are not going to make it out of high school. Now they'll probably get out of middle school, but out of high school because of a flawed testing system that is not, and as we know, they've implemented the standards and we have no clue how it's going to be tested, but we're going to penalize both the teacher and the student in order to move forward. And so the trouble that I think that we have is, to have any set of how do we move forward, the answer is there is no answer, because at the end of the day, they have provided only penalty. There is no gain here. There is no gain at the end of the day, other than we're giving you less money, we're going to change the standards on you, and we're not going to tell you how we're going to test on it. We're not even going to know if you are going to have a test. Just as they did in 2010, they said we're going to test one way, we're going to grade another way, and then wait 4 years because we're going to penalize you for it as well.
I think what Mr. Kennedy is saying is crucial to the matter. You talk about external influences, but the internal problem is the problem. The tests, the measurements are not reliable and they're not valid. And everything is based on unsound measurement.
Here's also the issue for us, and Mr. Mullen, we had this conversation earlier in the year, where all the kindergartners, where all the kindergartners go. I know where they are now. They're at Seven Rivers School. They reported that they had an enrollment of pre-K of 400 students. That's equivalent to 25 classes. 25, that's 5 elementary schools worth of kindergarten. At a private school that they said they had to hire 12 people, which I was wondering why they didn't have 25 people. And they were going to build a whole new building to support this huge influx of pre-K students that will stay there because their parents want to take them out of this testing environment. They don't want to subject their students to testing. That's what we're beginning. That's a huge trend in our little county for that kind. And if that's really true, that it's a 400 student enrollment in pre-K. That's shocking to me. We've seen our numbers, especially at the lower level elementary. We know the kids are bored because we have that data. Where are they? They haven't come into our school. Well, that's where they are.
And guess what they get to say? Well, we teach Common Core
Well, they can say whatever they want.
because they
also
don't, because they're not assessed on the
Our
same.
kids don't take FCAP.
That's right.
Our kids don't take any of this stuff. So I think that's, we're already beginning to see that impact, and it's impacting our budget, and it's impacting all the decisions that we make, because we're gonna see further decline in enrollment if that.
And who wanted that to happen in our state?
Anybody who doesn't like teachers or teachers union, public education.
I can name one.
Me too.
So, I mean, I think that's what's happening here. You know, we can see the data. We know charter schools are growing like crazy in other counties, and we haven't had that. But what we're seeing is the same effect, that people are pulling out of public education. And I told you a story the other day about a little third grader who was 10, who was being held back for another year to be 11 in third grade, which means he'd be 19 by the time he was a senior in high school. Mom, we'll just do homeschooling. That's not a viable option for our kids, but that's what people are doing. They're resorting to this kind of methodology. So.
And I know you want to get moving.
So here-
But
here's-
one of the things you do have to understand, we as a board and as district is saying, teachers, you have to go to more Common Core training. Teachers, you need to do more documentation. Teachers, you're going to need to also add this, the individualizing portfolios. We have added, and it's not just Citrus County, I'm saying, we have added because of this, again, flawed system. And we have these teachers that want to help these students, but they are then so beaten down. Go into any school, and as hard as our administrators and our district staff, our superintendent, our board tries to make them feel valuable, we have a system that is purely designed to penalize them and not reward them. They are basically told, to a large extent, if you don't do this, you don't have a job. If you don't do this, you are not of value because you have not gotten the student to achieve a level which we arbitrarily, how many rubrics are there? 55 different rubrics, plus that they'll assign to your VAM data or more. They will just pick that and say that is what you are worth. So I do worry that what we have and what we have to be very cognizant of is we have a force that is the front lines for our students' learning, and they are being demoralized every day because of someone's belief in what is happening in our school systems. And in the meantime, the private schools, the private charters are growing because they get to play by a different set of rules.
So here's my option. Here's my option. Do we stop the presentation? If you feel so strongly that there are external forces, do we stop the presentation and no longer look at the data because you're saying that it's a flawed system?
But
And
it's
that's,
not just external, it's internal.
well, and I'll say both then. And again, do we stop? And if you wish, I will stop.
We need to continue to look at the data because it's very,
Telling
it's very powerful. We have to deal with it. We can't hide from it.
you. No.
But my conclusion after looking at this is that this clearly demonstrates that this is not an indicator of student performance. It's an indicator
Absolutely.
of testing. It's not an indicator of our students. Our students didn't go up and then go down and then go sideways. Everybody else in the state of Florida at the same time had the same experience because the teachers weren't teaching or their system was gone or they just kind of weren't thinking this year. They're being manipulated and to shoot like a racetrack or tunnel and they have nowhere to go. And this is not an indicator of what our students are doing. It only indicates that what our students are doing is being judged by the same measurement system that is also accurately measuring all the other students in
States,
Florida
yeah.
by whatever criteria they choose to use. But it's accurate because our kids are no different than anybody else. And we're all people, so.
I don't want to see the presentation because we're all in the same box of frustration. But looking at the cards that have been dealt for this year, what are we doing to help address your essential.
And again,
So I
because
definitely see the presentation.
Ms. Belford, there's still teaching going on right now, and all the elements that you define as the emotional state, Mr. Kennedy is correct in terms of the frustrations that teachers, school administrators, parents, and kids are having, but it's continuing. I guess the point I make is the learning and the teaching isn't stopping. Sure, some are going to other places, but in Citrus County, that learning and teaching continues for the 14,292 students that are in our classrooms. So I just want to jump this next. So look at 6, 7, and 8 in the pattern. 6, 7, 8. And that's really interesting when you see with the levels that were reestablished with FCAT 2.0 and the Next Generation States Sunshine Standards. What happens starting 8th, 9th, 10th grade is really that bar was lowered. And so you're going to see a lower starting point, a higher end point in 2013. Very different than if you opened your packet and looked at 3rd grade right now. And you'd see a very different system. So this is 8th, looking at 9th. And by the way, in 9th grade, our performance is more aligned. That gap between us and the state is negligible. But in 10th grade, it is there, and there's a little separation starting.
But again, that's by design, because it was a purposeful recalibration of the high school reading standards and also changes from the score for 3.
Yes.
So this was purposeful because there was a flat line below 40, 50% reading level, and it got to the point where I think politically it was unacceptable. So politically, they had an influence. Oh, and you know, anybody on the street would look at this and say, oh, well, the high schools are doing a much better job than elementary schools.
27% growth in 7 years.
But it doesn't keep kids out of the intensive reading and any more numbers, does it? We have lower numbers in intensive reading this year?
We're going to look at, I'll show you that in a different picture.
I'd really love to see the methods that we see here applied by a coach in a football game with all the changes, every 5 minutes another change.
I just want to watch the referees.
That would never happen. Ms. Powers is the ardent baseball viewer that I am right now. That would mean that every year we change the rules of baseball or football, and
In the middle of a game.
in the middle of a game. Yeah, that doesn't happen.
Every time I look at this, it makes me think of, we're instructing on how to play football, but the measurement is going to be on basketball.
And as I share this with you, my reflective troubling is, what you say is true. However, I cannot permit myself to be pessimistic about it, because these are lives of children that I know.
Exactly.
These are lives of teachers that I know, principal that I know, live with and love. So I want to be optimistic. So look at this chart, and then I leave you with this chart, which may not be so optimistic. So when you look at the chart where we started at 85% proficiency, and this chart is actually tracking. I was a 10th grade student last year. I took the 10th grade FCAT 2.0 reading test. Look what happened to me and my cohorts, all of Citrus County schools in the state of Florida, from our 3rd grade work in 2006 to 2013. So again, Mrs. Deutschman, I'm nodding my head, yes, those patterns, the state, and then there's that upward swing that just occurred.
Just occurred, but if you back that back and went from 2004 to 2012, it'd be a slide, it'd be a ski slope.
It's the chute.
Yeah.
There's no ladder. So we've got a little shooting ladder going on here.
With no ladder.
So this is the part that Mrs. Powers, Mr. Kennedy, and if I can explain. So now this is 3rd grade differently. Although it's based on reading test, it also includes portfolios, good cause, SAT 10, SAT 9, ITBS, alternative assessment, summer school that we offer students. And in essence, it ends in 2012 because we have not formalized the 2013 data, which is a little over 97% again, about 90, we're estimating to be about 97.45. So what we're saying is, of those approximately 1,115 students almost each year in third grade, for Citrus County, 95, 96, 97% of them are promoted.
Which is about 30%, it looks like, are promoted based on an alternative system.
Correct. And that,
Is it 30?
that picture,
Kind of going back and
Yes.
forth of the.
if you go back and look at that 65%, yes. Well, yeah, we might want to look at I don't have 2000s.
2007, interestingly, 2007, 2008, 2009, before the 2010 drop, it was closer to 15%. But then, interestingly, if you go to when we had that big drop, that 20% or 25% drop from 2010 to 2011, we actually increased our promotional rate, as you can see, from 2009 to 2010, and we maintain it based on
And
that portfolio.
Mrs. Papacelli will tell you, and Mr. Hebert this year, that if you look at the SAT test that we administer at the end of summer school, that we have more students who were in summer school who failed the FCAT but are passing the SAT 10. So that further supports the inference you made. So this is a student who may have passed the that number is bigger. They may not have passed the FCAT, but they're passing pretty readily the alternative assessments that we offer. And if I may add, my colleagues across the state of Florida who are doing study on this collected the data, and there is only one other district that really is higher than us in terms of students passing those alternative assessments, and that's Flagler County. Our percentage of students who are passing those alternative assessments after summer, and actually at the end of the year, it's about 45%, where most districts average around 17%.
And I think their board has similar visions as our board in their operations, but this is that piece of complement. This is directly affected of the expectations and the empowerment of this board through to the superintendent's expectations to the administrators and the commitment of those administrators and those teachers that starts in second grade and before that, and then starts that gathering process that is a tremendous amount of work that, as Ms. Bryant would say, is not extra pay, that they do for those 30+% of their students, that some of those that get that letter, you probably aren't going to be promoted early on, and that this is the process we're going to go through. It is a tremendous amount of extra labor, work, and non-instructional time, as Mrs. Simon would remind us, that is happening. Because what? So that we can show that when they took the test, 30% can't get shown their grade level. But if we do it the old-fashioned way, we can show that 95% this year passed. But using a single assessment, day assessment, we can only show that 65% passed.
Mr. Simon, I need to stop for a moment and ask the board if we want to break for lunch.
May I just do one more slide? We'll be done with reading.
Hold on, I gotta get a consensus from these guys.
We're coming back together at 1 o'clock.
Yes.
As a teacher, I've never had more than 10 minutes to eat.
They brought us lunch, actually.
I know,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying, it won't take me 45 minutes.
I'm not worried about us, I'm worried about them.
So
They haven't even had a bathroom break.
should we allow Mr. Simon to do his one more slide and then break for lunch?
I don't care about breaking for lunch. We're on a roll here.
I was going to say, I
Okay,
can
fine.
sit here and eat.
Let it finish, let's take a bathroom break or something like that, and then come back.
All right. Continue, sir.
Now I'm afraid to press this next button after what Mr. Kennedy said, because this is really interesting. So now we're looking at not third grade, but the other side, the other rock in the highway, is 10th grade reading. Now, this is a complex slide if I can explain the data. From 2007 to 2011, the requirement for a student to graduate was that that student must score a level 2, a developmental scale of 300 to pass. While level 3 is proficient, the pass score was a score of 300, which is really a level 2. When you look at that from 6 to 11, you notice a 51 to 61% of our students in 10th grade passed. Now, that yellow box highlighting the year 2011, the shift, what it says there is that when you look at the percent level 3, which is the new marker for 12 and 13, only 52% would have passed. So really it's almost a 10% difference based on the shift in the requirement for what it takes to demonstrate proficiency. And again, the state now defines this as college-ready reading. Let me say that again. The same is true with algebra. It's college-ready. So that's what level 3 is in reading. That's what level 3 is. It's prepared for college-ready in algebra. So you see here, of course, what happened then in 2012. Both the state and the district dropped. And then again, I am pleased to see the response in 2013 of an increase, 8%, almost 10% for 9% for us, 4% for the state. But this is a whole new scale of what is proficient. So it's a level 3 now, not a level 2.
And so how is the portfolio option impacting that for
There
those?
is no portfolio
There
option.
is no portfolio option.
Was that a trick question, Mr. Kennedy?
It was.
That's a
But what is to get out of jail?
to get out of jail for, let me not say it that way. The concordant,
Intensive reading jail.
the concordant
We
option.
have intensive reading jail, I've been there.
The concordant option is an ACT or SAT score that may be achieved in order to, and there is no portfolio.
Mr. Simon, are you, and I don't know if you're familiar with Senate Bill 1108.
Remind me?
Are you, okay. Is somebody, I was gonna say the brain is out here working. 1108 has some references, and I'm a little confused. It has some references of private remediation in there. Have we looked at what is available to that? Because I've had some parents, interestingly, come to me and said, hey, can we use 1108 to purchase outside of school private remediation and not have to meet the remediation requirement within school and therefore lose? So I know I'm throwing this a little bit at you on the whim. It's not an answer but I do think that as we go through this, that's a question we need to ask, because I go back to, we are holding students back from opportunities in vocational options that we used to have in 2007 and before, where they could be productive individuals with high school diplomas, to say, no, now you've got to get an ACT score, or pretty much, what is the other get out of jail free card? SAT.
440. But Ms. Jordan will tell you that in the secondary world, there are different remediation options as opposed to what was in place several years ago.
But if I'm a level 1, there's still few. If I'm a level 2, there's a lot more options.
Is your question that will the public system pay for private, or is your question just?
Well, is it even an option? Because if it's an option, whether it can be done privately or, why can't I do virtual remediation? And why don't we use it, I guess, would be then a question.
Okay, so let me go back, let me try to answer this question, and then I'm going to hand my baton over. Virtual, there was, and I'm not sure if there virtual school in the last 2 weeks has shifted dramatically. Florida, I'm referring to Florida virtual school. And courses that were offered are no longer offered because they too are experiencing the same financial pinch that public schools have for the last, how many years, Mr. Walker, 5 or 6 years? The restricted funds. So now virtual school. They did offer a remediation, but I'm not so sure they offer it now in the diminished courses that are available to students. So I say that, again, I'm not sure if they offer remedial reading, but I do want Ms. Jordan to share with you some of the, and I think this is now shifting into the, so now what's happening in Citrus County, which might be a good transition and segue at this point of the day for lunch and restroom. So, Ms. Jordan, if you can just go over that.
It's about our discipline, I'm not quite sure. Per Senate Bill 1076, there were some adjustments made that have liberated placement of our level 1 and 2 students. It's a little staggered at the level of the high school, but what the state has said is for our students who are fluent, who do not have a problem with decoding or text reading efficiency, and they are level 1s and 2s, we may use a teacher who has been professionally trained in NG-CAR-PD strategies, which Citrus County has made a very aggressive effort at making sure our secondary teachers have that as a professional development package, that you may use that teacher, that content area teacher who's been trained in literacy strategies for that student. That 1 and 2 can be served in remediation capacity through that content area instruction. It is also true that our 9th graders, this year's 9th graders, can also be treated to that same. However, the other groups, our current 10th, 11th, and 12th, are still under the old rules, which say if you are a level 1, you have to have the most intensive intervention package that we can provide. So they are recognizing that there needs to be a releasing back into a more heterogeneous grouping for our students who are at that level 1 and level 2. And they have freed us with Senate Bill 1076 language for our secondary students who are fluent. Those students who are still showing up as disfluent, they are having such foundational gaps as to the level of being able to decode. We still need to capture intervention at our most intense level, whatever that is, perhaps a Read 180 program or what have you.
And Ms. Jordan, is that an example of that we have some of that flexibility is, for example, a web design maybe at Citrus High School where the teacher is also cross-trained in Carpe Diem, and they're able to then have those 1s and 2s in that classroom, meet the state requirement,
correct,
but also then have for remediation, reading.
Correct.
I was not here at the last meeting. I did have a chance to review some of the tape, and there was a member of the public that seemed to make a comment about some of the intensive reading. Is this not, though, really what is the answer? Is that we are getting many of staff members, particularly at the high school level, trained in the Carpe Diem so that we can provide that 1076 options of having web design and drafting maybe, or some other types of
and
options.
even social studies and science, which we know are powerful colleagues in the literacy instruction. They have rigorous text, and the movement is really, 1076 language reflects that movement towards the Common Core. That is to say that for all of our students, wherever they are in reading proficiency per FCAT, they need to be exposed to increasingly more rigorous texts. Well, when you shelter them in intensive reading classrooms, sometimes they don't have access to those increasingly more rigorous texts. So that language is responsive to a slow movement, not, okay, you're cured, so here you go. You know, now you're completely released. They should be supported with teachers who've been trained in those strategies that are most ideal for that content area instruction, focused on that struggling reader, because I feel that language is moving students closer to what the vision of the framers for the Common Core really had in mind, which was exposing students through progressively more difficult, more challenging texts. And that would be partnering with our colleagues, you know, in other content areas. So it is a setup move to help provide more exposure to those texts.
So if I'm a web teacher and I'm teaching web design to a reading intensive 1 or 2, the state probably exempts me from their reading score being on my VAM then, because I wouldn't probably get penalized, I would think, because I'm teaching them web design Or am I going to also get graded against my VAM on their reading score?
I think I need to defer to.
You may have the baton. Okay, so in chemistry, this is called a mixture. You're mixing that teacher would not be using, if you are the web design teacher, you are not, your agreement according to this year's structure for VAN is not FCAT, it is the possibly industry certification proficiency of your students in your web design class, because they are in there for web design first. The remediation is supplement to that. So for you personally, it is not.
So how do I get out of being a 1 or 2 then on my reading?
The student. The student is being supported in your class by the reading interventions that you are offering and providing, the reading practices. At the same time, I'm going to tell you that and I've been the high school principal, while I know that there are some students that may benefit by CAR-PD, those career technical teachers, I still may put the student, and if this is a 10th grade student, just look at this number. So there are 300 plus 10th grade students that have not met, in 2013, did not meet the graduation requirement of level 3. What's happening with those 300 students now? There's a full spectrum. And if they're level 1, as Ms. Jordan said, I would probably have you in a remediation class right now getting you ready for the FCAT retake, which is the first week of October, and at the same time, I am also having that teacher instruct with you strategies that would lead to success on the ACT test that I have as a class scheduled you to take after the October FCAT in case you do not pass, so that you have another option. So for the next, as a junior, for the next 4 or 5 test options, I'm going to have you fly in at both levels, striving to pass the FCAT and striving the ACT or SAT. And I may have you in that CAR-PD classroom as well.
Here's the problem, Mr. Simon. We're there, if we have that student and we're trying to get that student who's a 1 or a 2, that student is probably going to struggle in a collegiate boundary, pathway. So we may be working with that student to try and find them, at least directly out of post-secondary, a pathway that is successful for them.
Right.
But that pathway is barred by the requirement of that 1 or 2. You just said, even as a principal, you're going to be putting them in this class and in this class to try and get them to be successful in something that isn't getting them to be successful in their life. It is getting them to be successful in passing a test. And so I'm saying, now here's my other backup. Which teacher is going to have their VAM affected by this student's score? The reading teacher or the language arts teacher at the high school? And what other teachers, including administrators? Because the principal's going to have their VAM affected by it. The assistant principal is probably going to have their VAM.
If I can stop, there is no FCAT retake VAM. There is no FCAT retake VAM.
So I'm a 10th grader though, and I've got my 1 or 2. In 11th grade, how do I get out of remediation? Do I ever get out of remediation?
If you pass the FCAT, or as Ms. Jordan just said,
So
you
again,
would be placed
then in the 10th grade, that teacher, what you've already done is in 9th grade, you're already putting that student through all of these other remediation tools, or I'm trying to think of interventions, that the student is doing, taking their opportunities away from, again, the pathway they really need, in order so that we can have the administrator get their scoring okay, have the student hopefully get out of a jail-free card, or at least high enough where we can put them into some other alternatives, and the teacher's getting penalized. And if I recall, intensive reading teachers in particular tend to get hit pretty hard when it comes to their gains. Because these students are gonna be having a tough time with these games.
So the option is, remember the other option, if that student doesn't pass the 10th grade reading, they don't get a standard diploma.
And there goes my point.
So
In
that's-
2007, would they have gotten a standard diploma?
No.
They still wouldn't have gotten one? If I was an ESE student in 2007?
Even an ESE student in 2013, you still may qualify for a diploma without passing the FCAT as a waiver, and that's where also I believe.
Are we writing more ESE students in our district and throughout the state? Are we increasing the percentage of ESE students? I know the answer anyway. The answer is I believe we're trending down, are we not, with our ESE population?
The population is trending down, and when that population trends down, then you have a smaller N, and therefore you have a smaller.
But it means that I have less students that are being able to use that opportunity.
Right.
So I've got a higher number of students that are going to not be able to use that as an opportunity. And unfortunately, I point back to not the best parts of our district's implementation of RTI, but the state's forcing us of RTI. Because that has changed how we can get our students help in those final exams and getting them out of jail with a free card. And I go back to, again, we have taken opportunities away from students. 1076 gave us some options, but we have now more students that are going to have to pass the test because we have less students in ESE qualifying.
Right.
You know, and the thing that's interesting to me is that because our scores mimic the state, we don't deal with issues that a lot of the bigger counties do. We don't have high percentages of ELL students. We don't have, even though our free and reduced lunch numbers are growing, they don't come from the same kind of poverty that is in inner city schools. I talked to the school board member from Escambia County, and she was telling me for the first time they have 10 F schools. They only had 5 before. Some other counties never had an F school, and last 2 years they have an F school. And then they talk about those schools being made up of primarily minority students. In Orange County, they have entire schools that are made up of students that have only been in this country a year or two and don't speak English. You know, and our reading test scores mimic those same students. So, you know, it's almost like how can you even draw any conclusions at some point? But when you look at the pass rate, that's probably the most essential information that we have, is what can we do, 3rd grade. We're seeing that we're able to pass our students regardless of the test scores. The test scores have no relationship to the actual reading level of students that we can prove through other methodologies. And probably what we need to have is also have that at 10th grade level, in addition to ACT and SAT, which is just another standardized test, multiple choice fill in the blank, which students have trouble with. There should be some other, and you should talk to your friend Jimmy
I do.
Smith, because maybe that is the one solution that we're lacking in Florida, is an alternative assessment, a true alternative assessment based on teacher evaluation
Already there.
at the 10th grade reading level that keeps kids from graduating from high school.
And I think that I think in his case, I get the feeling he understands that. What he'll have to decide those things for himself. But I'm not sure that I think enough of the legislators, and in particular DOE, understands the barrier that one piece is for our high schools and students. They've come a long way with 1076, but that is a critical piece to capturing, I think, another 30% of our students.
Yeah, you're right, at least.
And so I see the data, but I don't see where we help you.
And to piggyback off of that, I've moved along through the slides, through the paper piece that you've given me. Looking at the math, we're trending basically the same as within the district compared to state. There was an anomaly in 8th grade at 2013 where we're spiking, going the opposite direction of the state.
You can explain that very easily. That's a very interesting explanation.
The spike in 8th grade. You want to take the time to do that?
Play.
Frank, you're,
I'm not hungry.
okay, so this shift in display in data is a result that our students in 8th grade in Citrus County, that 1/3 of them, typically speaking, across our middle schools participate in either Algebra 1 or geometry. Likewise, their teachers who teach the algebra geometry also embed and infuse in their instruction the 8th grade mathematics standards. So when it comes to assessment, those students take the geometry or the algebra, and they take the 8th grade assessment. There are many students, as a result of that, who do superbly on those. These are the top kids, again, 1/3 of all our middle schoolers. And when you look at that spike there, it's because those students, there's a large number, large percent, 1/3, who have taken advanced classes while at the same time taking the 8th grade FCAT Math 2.0 test.
So that in itself gives us a focus on what's going on in the Citrus County area that's right.
Different, correct.
And that's been a very calculated effort on the district's part to do that. I know.
And the teachers, because
Yeah.
now as an algebra teacher, while I'm teaching you algebra, I'm also making sure I integrate in there those other pieces that you may have missed that are part of that 8th grade curriculum and that are tested on the 8th grade test, because I'm reminding you, you may have the skill for mastery of it, but I'm reminding you what that looks like.
But Mr. Simon, didn't you also tell me that many districts chose not to administer 8th grade FCAT test to students who were enrolled in algebra or geometry middle
Correct.
school? So we enrolled 100% of our 8th graders in
Correct.
FCAT math, and many other districts only enrolled the kids not in algebra and geometry, which to me is distorting based on aptitude. I told you this the other day. It's so clear because if we decide only to test the kids not in algebra and geometry, then we're only testing the kids that have those lower level math skills, or we're not testing the kids that have the higher level math skills. We're excluding them from the testing pool. So you would see that.
Correct.
You would see a decrease in results, and it's very misleading because if you looked at this, you would say, boy, 8th grade math, they're really having a hard time there, not realizing that many districts opted out those high-performing students.
So this is a good stopping point, Mrs. Bryant.
I want
because
to
I'm-
add something to that, though.
Go ahead,
There were
Mrs.
many districts last year that we found out also with the PERT test. We were told by the state, all of our students would take the PERT test, so we followed the rules and gave them all, administered the PERT test. However, there were some districts that slid under the radar and didn't give all their students a PERT test. So when you go look at that data, again, it's kind of misconstrued by the way.
I want a level playing field. This is not level.
That
Sorry.
also, Mrs. Himmel, adds to this closing for the break here. And this is also linking to your reference to the summit that's going on right now, because one of the key elements of the summit is the statute that defines accountability. So I'm going to read to you this piece, and then I want you to link it to what you, Mrs. Himmel, just said, and Mrs. Deutschman. School grades. Improving our education accountability system to further ensure transparency and fairness while providing meaningful and useful information to our parents and educators about how our students and schools are performing. That's right out of statute. So this stop point is saying,
May I add to that?
Yes, ma'am, you may.
And it does nothing that impacts our kids going to college.
so the summit right now asks these questions. These are part of the governor's 7 guiding principles. Is it easy to understand? I'm putting the form for question. Again, is it easy to understand? What you just said, Mrs. Himmel, on the PERT. Is it transparent? And most importantly, is it meaningful?
And when it's not?
Okay, we're going to recess our meeting, and we have an administrative hearing at 1 p.m.
Mr. Bryant, Mr. Bastoni wants y'all to know that there's a new chicken breast sandwich with the low sodium seasoning and the wedges meal that he's would like y'all to say.
All right.
Mr. Simon, please come back. You look so deflated.
No, I am not deflated. I'm just, my perplexed response is, are we stopping? Are we done on the presentation, or do you need to have closure on the data?
We're gonna come back after the administrative hearing with you.
Okay.